Welcome to the channel for another exciting video. Most people who watch our videos are not subscribed, so I kindly ask you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Your like is essential for YouTube to understand that this content is relevant, so please like, share, and leave your comment. Now, let's get to the story. The storm roared fiercely, and the windows of Eleanor's house trembled under the intensity of the winds. Raindrops beat fiercely against the glass, causing her to curl up in her armchair, wrapped in a tattered blanket. Shadows danced on the walls, created by the lightning that illuminated the dark, coal-like sky. Loneliness, her constant companion, felt heavier on that stormy night. With a deep sigh, she looked out the window, watching the drops slide down, reminding her of happier days. Suddenly, a strange noise interrupted her thoughts. It was a sharp sound, almost like a whimper coming from the garden. What could that be? Eleanor murmured as she slowly rose from the armchair. With her heart racing, she walked to the front door and, hesitantly, opened it. The cold wind hit her hard, but curiosity pushed her outside. In the darkness of the yard, a shape stood out. It was a dog, a seemingly gentle dog, but with soaked fur and an expression of someone who had endured much suffering. He looked at her with big, sad eyes as if he knew she could help him. "Oh my God, you're hurt," Eleanor exclaimed as she crouched down to get closer. The dog, apparently scared, hesitated but soon moved forward, seeking shelter under the protection of his new home. "Come on, come in," she said, gesturing for the dog. "Don't stay out there, you'll get sick." The dog hesitated for a moment, but the need for warmth and safety prevailed. As he crossed the threshold, he shook himself, splattering water all over the floor. Eleanor laughed despite the situation. "It seems you don't care about a clean house, huh?" she commented as the dog settled down, panting and tired. When the dog lay down in a corner of the foyer, Eleanor sat beside him, stroking his head. "You need a name," she said thoughtfully. "How about Buddy? That seems right for you." But what she didn't know was that this meeting was just the beginning of something much bigger. Suddenly, she began to feel strange. A weakness took over her body, and before she could understand what was happening, her legs gave way. "Oh no," she whispered as the ground seemed to rush toward her. Darkness began to take over her vision. Buddy, sensing the change in the environment, immediately got up and started barking. His bark was piercing, almost desperate. He ran to his owner, jumping around her, trying to wake her. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" he seemed to ask. The scene was distressing. The dog, in his instinctive loyalty, didn't know how to call for help, but his persistence was admirable. However, Buddy's barks did not go unnoticed. Neighbors, alerted by the sound, began to gather outside the house. One of them, Mr. Thompson, a veteran living in the next house, was the first to notice the situation. "Eleanor, are you in there?" he shouted as he approached the door. Hearing his voice, Buddy ran to the entrance, jumping and barking as if to say, "Go, come in, she needs help." With the help of Mr. Thompson and the other neighbors, the door was broken down, and they found Eleanor collapsed on the floor, pale and unmoving. "Call an ambulance," Thompson shouted as he tried to check her pulse. Buddy, not fully understanding, positioned himself beside Eleanor, his gaze fixed on the woman he had just met but already loved. The storm continued outside, but inside that house, something magical began to unfold. The story of Eleanor and Buddy was just beginning, and the connection between them promised to change not only their lives, but also the community around them. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes, smelling the distinctive scent of alcohol and disinfectant. The bright hospital light dazzled her, and she tried to remember what had happened. With effort, she turned her head and saw a nurse writing information on a clipboard. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. How are you feeling?" the nurse asked with a warm smile. What happened? Where am I?" Eleanor's voice came out weak, like a whisper. "You fainted at home. A neighbor heard the barks of a dog and came to check. Thanks to that, you are here receiving care," the nurse explained, adjusting the covers on the bed. "A dog," Eleanor murmured, remembering Buddy, the dog she had found on that stormy night. The thought of Buddy made her feel a little lighter, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Is he okay? The dog? Yes. He's great. He's at your house, waiting for you. The neighbors said he didn't stop barking until you were taken to the hospital. The nurse smiled. He seems to be a good friend. He is, Eleanor said with a trembling voice. A good friend. After a few hours, Eleanor was discharged, and with the help of a neighborhood friend, she was taken back home. As soon as she entered, a flurry of barks welcomed her. Buddy was at the door, wagging his tail feverishly, as if he knew she was back. Oh, my dear, Eleanor exclaimed, kneeling to hug the dog. He jumped on her, licking her face, and a laugh escaped her lips. It was a strange but good feeling. In the following days, Buddy became a constant presence in Eleanor's life. He not only accompanied her on walks around the block, but also seemed to understand her emotions. On a cloudy day, Eleanor was sitting on the couch, looking at photos from her youth. Buddy, lying beside her, lifted his head as if sensing her sadness. You feel it too? Eleanor asked, stroking the dog's head. Life can be so lonely sometimes. Buddy just looked at her with the wisdom that only an animal could possess. On a whim, Eleanor decided it was time to let Buddy explore the backyard. Come on, boy. What are you waiting for? As soon as they got outside, Buddy began to sniff the ground as if he were on a mission. Eleanor watched him with curiosity, laughing as he dug in a corner of the garden. What are you looking for? A hidden treasure? But to her surprise, Buddy stopped and began to dig with more determination. Within minutes, he revealed a small rusty box, covered in dirt. Eleanor was speechless. What is this? She murmured, kneeling beside the dog. Carefully, she began to unearth the box. It was heavy, and as she opened it, a smell of aged paper wafted out. Inside, she found yellowed letters and a photograph of a young couple, smiling at the camera. Eleanor's heart raced as she looked at the image. Who are they, Buddy? Do you know? She asked, looking into the dog's eyes, which were watching her intently. It was as if he had brought that object into her life for a greater reason. Buddy seemed excited, bouncing around her as if he wanted her to discover something important. Intrigued, Eleanor began to examine the letters, trying to decipher the handwriting that flowed across the paper. The connection she was forming with Buddy made her feel alive again, as if a new hope was blooming in her heart. You're a real detective, aren't you, Buddy? She laughed and patted the dog. Let's find out who these people are together. And so, on that sunny day, Eleanor and Buddy began a new journey, unaware that the answers to their questions were just a few steps away, waiting to be discovered. Eleanor was sitting on the small couch in the living room, the soft morning light filtering through the dusty window. Her heart still raced from the experience of the previous night as she looked at Buddy, who lay on the floor, watching her with his expressive eyes. The wooden box, now open, was beside her, revealing a collection of yellowed letters and a worn photograph of a cheerful couple. The man, with a broad smile, looked so vibrant that he almost seemed to leap from the image. The woman next to him, with curly hair and a floral dress, radiated a happiness that made Eleanor's chest tighten. Who are you? Eleanor murmured, picking up the photograph between her trembling fingers. Do you know? Buddy. The dog lifted his head as if he understood and gave a soft bark, as if encouraging her to continue the search. Driven by a mix of curiosity and nostalgia, Eleanor decided to investigate further. She gathered the letters, one by one, feeling the weight of words written decades ago. The handwriting was delicate, but the ink had faded. As she read, memories began to flow. Dear Tomas, began one of the letters. Today we went to the park, and the sky was so blue. I remember when you promised me we would be together forever. I hope you don't forget me. Tomas? Eleanor repeated aloud, an echo of remembrance in her mind. The name made her feel something familiar, a connection lost long ago. She looked at Buddy, who was now standing, moving purposefully around the room. The dog seemed to be searching for something, his tail wagging with enthusiasm. Let's take a walk, Eleanor said, struggling to get up. I think you know where we should go. Buddy gave a small bark, as if confirming, and headed toward the door. The walk through the neighborhood brought back a wave of memories. Eleanor observed the houses, each telling stories of intertwined lives. Buddy, always ahead, seemed to guide her, as if he had a destination in mind. He stopped in front of an abandoned building, his paws gently tapping on the ground as he looked back at Eleanor, waiting for her to follow. "Is this where you wanted to bring me?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. The building was covered in graffiti and had broken windows, but to Eleanor, it was a portal to the past. Upon entering, she was immediately enveloped by a wave of nostalgia. The smell of old wood and the echo of children's laughter seemed to dance around her. As she explored the rooms, flashes of her youth began to emerge. She saw herself playing in the backyard, running after a balloon, laughing with friends. But amidst the happy memories, there was also a shadow, a dark corner of her past, a place where laughter had turned into tears. "I don't want to remember this," she said to Buddy, who was following closely, watching her with a sympathetic expression. "Why did you bring me here?" Buddy approached and, with a gentle nudge, made her look at a wall where a small graffiti mural depicted children playing. It was a familiar scene, the very one she had lived years ago. This was me," Eleanor whispered, her voice choked. "I used to come here with my friends." In that moment, something inside her stirred. It was as if Buddy was trying to connect the dots, pulling her back into the light, to the memories she had buried. The pain of the past began to dissipate, and the happy memories were surfacing again. "Buddy, you are more than just a dog, aren't you?" She looked into his eyes, seeking answers. "You somehow know all of this." The dog just wagged his tail, as if saying there was no need for words. What Buddy really knew, Eleanor wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. He was guiding her on a journey of healing. The connection between them was strengthening, and with each step they took, Eleanor felt she was reconnecting not only with her past but also with herself. Eleanor was sitting in her favorite armchair, the soft afternoon light filtering through the curtains, while Buddy rested at her feet. The presence of the dog made the house, once so silent and lonely, seem alive. She looked at him, observing the sparkle in the animal's eyes, and smiled. "You are a good boy, Buddy. Who would have thought a dog would come into my life like this, on a stormy night?" Buddy lifted his head, as if he understood every word she said. With a slight wag of his tail, he got up and approached her, nudging his nose against Eleanor's hand. She laughed, a sound that seemed thunderous compared to the years of silence surrounding her. "I'm not a very cheerful person, you know, but you seem to have a special way of making things change." As Eleanor spoke, something inside her began to open up. The loneliness that had enveloped her for so long seemed to dissipate, and she found herself telling stories from her childhood to Buddy. "When I was young, there was a wonderful place near my house, a park full of flowers and laughter. I used to run and play with the other kids. Oh, how I loved that place." The memory made her smile, and Buddy sat beside her, listening intently. In the days that followed, the connection between Eleanor and Buddy deepened. He had become her faithful companion, always by her side, but he also had a peculiar way of guiding her. On a sunny morning, while they were walking through the neighborhood, Buddy tugged on the leash towards a street Eleanor didn't usually visit. "Where are you taking me, boy?" she asked, laughing at the dog's determination. Buddy seemed to know exactly where to go, leading her to a forgotten place, an abandoned building that Eleanor recognized instantly. "Here. This is the place," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "I used to come here with my friends. I remember running through these hallways." Memories began to flood her mind, but they also brought forth an old pain. The building was in ruins, but it still held echoes of laughter and play. As she explored the site, Buddy accompanied her, sniffing the ground and investigating every corner. Suddenly, he started to dig furiously in an area covered with dry leaves. "What did you find, Buddy?" Eleanor asked, moving closer. The dog stopped, looking at her with an intense sparkle in his eyes. "Do you think there's something here?" After a few minutes of digging, Eleanor knelt down and began to help the dog. Together, they discovered a small wooden box, covered in dirt. With trembling hands, Eleanor pulled it out and opened it. Inside, there were yellowed letters and a photograph of a smiling young couple. "Who are they?" she asked, curiosity mixed with a feeling of nostalgia. Buddy, sensing her emotion, moved closer and gently licked her hand. "You're right, buddy. This is special." Eleanor held the photo tightly, her heart racing. "These people, they might have been important to me, but I can't remember." The anguish in her voice made Buddy snuggle even closer, as if trying to comfort her. In the following days, Buddy continued to guide her, taking her on walks that helped her rediscover parts of her life she had forgotten. On one such walk, as they passed by a nearby park, a group of children was playing ball. Buddy, always alert, began to get restless. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" Eleanor followed his gaze and saw a child about to cross the street. "No!" she shouted. But before she could move, Buddy dashed forward, running toward the boy. The dog, in a swift movement, pulled the child back, making him stop just a few steps from the sidewalk. The scene shocked the nearby adults, and Eleanor's heart raced with concern and relief. "You saved his life, Buddy." She ran over to them, her chest full of gratitude. Neighbors began to gather, amazed at the dog's bravery. An elderly woman with a broad smile commented, "This dog is more than just a pet. He's a hero." In the midst of the crowd, Eleanor felt a wave of pride and love for the animal that had entered her life so unexpectedly. Now, more than ever, she wondered, was Buddy really just a dog? Was there something deeper, a mystical connection that transcended the ordinary? She looked at Buddy, who was now surrounded by children, and smiled. "What are you, Buddy? A guardian, a friend, or perhaps a savior?" Eleanor felt a slight weakness settling in her body, but she was determined not to let it overwhelm her. She got up from the chair, looking at Buddy, who was lying beside her, his eyes fixed on her. There was something almost human in the dog's gaze, a concern that made her heart warm. "I'm fine, Buddy. Just a bit tired," she murmured, trying to reassure him. But deep down, she knew she wasn't okay. As she walked across the room, Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. The world around her began to spin, and she leaned on the table. Buddy, always attentive, jumped up and ran to her, nudging against her leg and looking directly into her eyes, as if trying to understand what was happening. "Don't worry, boy. I'll sit down for a moment," she said, giving a weak smile. However, the weakness quickly turned into unbearable pressure. Eleanor tried to move to the sofa, but her legs gave out. With a thud, she fell to the floor, and the pain hit her in an instant. Buddy, in a panic, began to bark, a sharp and desperate sound that echoed throughout the house. The dog ran to the door, stopping only to look at Eleanor, as if waiting for her to follow. She tried to call for help, but the words barely left her lips. At that moment, Buddy, understanding that he needed to act, ran outside. The barks echoed through the neighborhood, drawing the attention of those nearby. "Buddy, no, come back," Eleanor shouted, but her body would not respond. With each bark from the dog, her desperation grew, and she knew that if she couldn't get up, she would be in trouble. Neighbors began to come out of their houses, attracted by the commotion. Meanwhile, Buddy was jumping back and forth on the sidewalk, barking non-stop. "What was that?" asked a woman, looking around. "It's Eleanor's dog. He seems to be in trouble," replied a passing man. "Come on, we need to see what's happening," said the woman, leading some people to quickly head to Eleanor's house. Buddy continued to bark, guiding the neighbors to the scene. "This way, come. It's over here," he seemed to say, as he ran back to the front door, looking back as if he were waiting for them to follow him. When the neighbors arrived, the scene they found was alarming. Eleanor was lying on the ground, pale and weak. "Eleanor," shouted the woman who had spoken earlier, crouching down beside her. "What happened?" The man accompanying her quickly grabbed his phone and called emergency services. "It's okay. We're going to take care of you," he said, while another neighbor tried to comfort Buddy, who seemed to be in a constant state of agitation. With the arrival of the ambulance, the paramedic quickly entered, assessing the situation. "What happened here?" he asked as he crouched down to examine Eleanor. "She fainted, But the dog woke her up, replied the woman, as Buddy continued to bark, as if alerting everyone to the seriousness of the situation. The paramedic looked at the dog, who was a constant and restless presence, and said, "This dog deserves a medal. He saved her life." As first aid was being administered, Eleanor became aware of what was happening around her. "Buddy." "I'm here," she managed to say, reaching out to the dog that was beside her, now calmer but still restless. He came closer and licked her hand, as if assuring her that she was okay. "You're in good hands, Eleanor. We're going to take you to the hospital," the paramedic said as he carefully placed her on the stretcher. Buddy, realizing that Eleanor was being taken away, began to bark again, running alongside the stretcher. "She's going to be fine, Buddy," the woman said, trying to comfort him. "You did an amazing job. Now we need you to stay here and wait." And so, the small group of neighbors gathered around the house as Eleanor was taken to the ambulance. Buddy stood at the door, staring intently, as if he knew that his mission was just beginning, and that he had a vital role to play not only in Eleanor's life, but in the whole community. Eleanor woke up in a hospital room, the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains. The pain in her chest still throbbed, but there was something different in the air. Buddy, the dog who had saved her, was by her side, lying on the floor, a constant vigil. He lifted his head as soon as she opened her eyes, and his brown eyes sparkled with unconditional love. An involuntary smile appeared on Eleanor's lips. "Hi, my friend," she murmured, reaching out to pet Buddy's wet fur. "It seems you're not going to leave me alone, are you?" The dog wagged his tail as if he understood every word. After a few days of recovery, Eleanor began to think about what she could do to repay Buddy for what he had done for her. He was not just a dog. He was a symbol of hope and rebirth. However, the idea was still just in her mind, like a seed waiting to germinate. It was on a sunny afternoon, when she finally returned home, that the idea began to take shape. While Buddy explored the yard, Eleanor followed him, watching his contagious energy. The dog seemed happier than ever, running back and forth as if on a mission. "You have a special way of seeing the world, Buddy," Eleanor said with a laugh. "Maybe I should learn from you." As she looked around, her eyes fixed on an empty lot near her house. The place was overgrown with weeds and dirt, a forgotten and neglected space by the community. What if we turned that lot into a park? The idea slipped from her lips, almost like a prayer. A place where people can come, play, and remember that life is beautiful, even when it gets tough. Buddy stopped, staring at her with an expression that seemed to say, "Yes, do it." The next morning, Eleanor gathered with some neighbors in the small community square. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with laughter and lively conversations. "Hi, everyone," Eleanor began, a little nervous but determined. "I want to share an idea that could change our neighborhood." Curious looks turned to her, and one of the neighbors, Mr. Thompson, interrupted. "What do you have in mind, Eleanor? What if we transformed that empty lot into a community park? A place for children to play, for the elderly to gather, and maybe even a shelter for animals." The passion in her voice was palpable, and the faces around her began to light up with interest. "A park? That would be wonderful," exclaimed Mrs. Margaret, one of her oldest neighbors. "It's been so long since we've had a place like that around here." "Yes, and Buddy can be our symbol," said Eleanor, pointing to the dog that was approaching as if he understood the conversation. "He brought so much joy and saved my life. We can do something amazing in his honor." The neighbors began to get excited, exchanging ideas and suggestions about what could be included in the park. "We can have a picnic area, a walking path, and even a space for animals," said young Tom. The energy of the meeting was contagious, and Eleanor felt her heart warm at the idea of bringing the community together around something positive. "So, let's do it. How about we meet again next week to start planning? We need volunteers and ideas, count me in," shouted Mrs. Margaret, and soon others joined her, promising to help in any way they could. That afternoon, as everyone was saying goodbye, Eleanor looked at Buddy, who was lying next to her, tongue out and a satisfied look on his face. "This is just the beginning, my friend. Together, we will transform this place." Buddy seemed to understand, getting up and doing a happy twirl, as if celebrating the new mission ahead of them. Eleanor smiled, feeling that she had finally found renewed purpose. As the team of workers began to dig the ground for what would be the new community park, a buzz of excitement filled the area. Amid laughter and animated conversations, Eleanor watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and nostalgia. Buddy, always by her side, seemed more energized than ever, as if he knew something important was about to happen. "Hey, look at this," shouted one of the workers, holding up an object covered in dirt. He crouched down to clean the grime, revealing a small wooden chest weathered by time. "It looks like we found something interesting." Eleanor approached, feeling a wave of curiosity. "What did you find?" she asked, almost not believing that something like this could happen amidst all the digging. "I have no idea, but it looks like it has a lock," replied the worker, trying to open the chest. With a snap, the lid opened, revealing a collection of aged letters, faded photographs, and some personal items. Eleanor felt her heart race at the sight of one of the portraits. It was an image of a young woman and a man smiling, both exuding genuine happiness. These are from my family," Eleanor murmured, picking up one of the letters. The handwritten words were almost illegible, but the emotion she felt touching those papers was undeniable. "My God, I didn't know they still existed." Buddy, who had been standing beside her until then, began to sniff the ground as if trying to find more. His tail wagged with enthusiasm, and he seemed more determined than ever in his mission. "You're right, Buddy. There must be more around here," Eleanor said, looking at the dog with a smile. "You always knew there was something here, didn't you?" The workers, inspired by Eleanor's energy, began to dig around as more objects surfaced. Each discovery felt like a fragment of a lost story, a connection to the past that Eleanor thought she had forgotten. Photos of family gatherings, love letters between her parents, and even childhood toys emerged from the earth, bringing back memories long buried. "This is amazing. Look at this photo," one of the workers exclaimed, holding up an image of a birthday party. "It looks like everyone was having a great time." "It was my 10th birthday," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling. "Those were people I loved, and who loved me." Buddy, sensing the intensity of the moment, stopped and looked directly into Eleanor's eyes, as if understanding the depth of her emotions. "You knew, didn't you?" Eleanor asked, stroking the dog's head. "You brought all this back to me." As the excavation continued, a familiar voice interrupted the moment. "Eleanor." A gray-haired man approached, his expression surprised and recognized. "It's you. I can't believe it's you. Henry," Eleanor exclaimed, recognizing an old neighbor. "It's been so long. What are you doing here?" "I'm living in the city again. I heard about the park and came to see how things were going." "I never imagined you would be here," Henry said, a smile lighting up his face. "And I saw what you found. That was your family, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was," Eleanor replied, her voice choked. "Those letters, those photos. I thought everything had been lost." Henry looked at Buddy, who was by Eleanor's side, seeming pleased to have helped reconnect lost ties. "That dog is something special, isn't he? He always knew where to go. Sometimes life gives us signs we can't see." Eleanor nodded, her heart beating with gratitude. "He brought me back not only to my memories but also to the people I loved. I'm starting to realize that Buddy has a greater purpose in my life. But why does he know so much about me?" Henry smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he's a guide, a way to help you discover everything you need. Sometimes the answer to our questions is closer than we think." Eleanor looked at Buddy, who now seemed more than just a dog. He was a link between her past and present, a symbol of hope and renewal. Eleanor was in the dining room, a simple table but lovingly decorated, when the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. Her heart raced. She knew that the visit from her daughter, Clara, could be both a relief and a storm. It had been years since they last saw each other, and the distance between them felt like an abyss. With a nervous gesture, Eleanor fixed her gray hair and headed to the door. When she opened it, Clara was there, hesitant, with teary eyes. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. Eleanor felt a wave of mixed emotions, longing, pain, and a timid hope. "Hi, Clara," Eleanor replied, trying to hide her anxiety. "Come in, please." Clara hesitated for a moment but finally crossed the threshold of the house. Buddy, who was lying on the rug, lifted his head and ran over to Clara, wagging his tail. The young woman smiled, crouching down to pet the dog. "Hi, Buddy," she said, her voice softening. "You're the famous Buddy, aren't you?" "He's special," Eleanor commented, watching the interaction with a mix of pride and nostalgia. "He has been a light in my life, Clara." Clara lifted her eyes to her mother, her expression changing. "I heard about what happened. Mom, I saw what Buddy did for you. He saved your life." "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice heavy with emotion. "It was a miracle. He brought me back home in a way I never expected." The two sat at the table, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Buddy, sensing the tension, settled between them as if he wanted to bring them together. Eleanor took a deep breath, breaking the silence. I'm so sorry for what happened between us. I know I left many doors closed." "I'm sorry too, Mom," Clara replied, her voice choked. "Life pulled us apart, and I don't know how to fix it." "We can try, can't we?" Eleanor asked, hope beginning to blossom in her heart. "I want to understand you and your feelings. I want you to understand me too." Clara looked at the ground for a moment, then raised her eyes, determined. "I want to, Mom, but it's hard. There's so much we haven't talked about." "Then let's talk," Eleanor suggested, looking at her daughter with sincerity. "Let's talk about what hurt us, about what separated us." The atmosphere began to change, with the sun coming through the window and illuminating the space. Clara hesitated a bit but started to speak. "I felt abandoned when you withdrew, when Dad passed away. You closed yourself off and I didn't know how to get in." Clara's words were like knives to Eleanor's heart. "I was so lost, Clara. The pain was unbearable. I didn't know how to deal with it, and I withdrew from everything and everyone." Buddy, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, came closer and rested his head on Eleanor's lap. She stroked his fuzzy ears, seeking comfort in the dog's presence. "He helped me open my heart again. He makes me laugh, makes me feel alive." "I saw that," Clara said, a sad smile appearing on her lips. "You seem happier. I miss my mom." Eleanor felt a wave of emotion. "I miss you, Clara. I want us to reconnect. I want you to be part of my life again." Clara lifted her eyes, tears at the corners. "I want that too, Mom. Let's try, for Buddy and for us." The conversation flowed, and the two began to share memories, laughter, and also tears. Buddy watched, as if he knew he was bringing together those two lost souls. Eleanor and Clara were finally starting to rebuild, a small work of art being shaped anew, and the dog's presence was the glue that held everything together. The city of Chicago seemed invigorated after the storm that brought Buddy into Eleanor's life. She looked out the window of her new home, now lit by the radiant sun shining over the previously abandoned lot. The park project, inspired by the indomitable spirit of the dog, was about to come to fruition. A group of neighbors, excited and full of energy, had gathered for the grand opening. "Eleanor, are you ready?" asked Maria, a longtime neighbor, as she arranged flowers around the entrance of the park. "This place is going to be a real haven for us and for the animals." "I am. I can't believe we're making this happen," Eleanor replied, her heart racing with emotion. She looked at Buddy, who was happily running among the groups of children, his gaze attentive and full of life. With everyone's help, the park now had a colorful playground, picnic tables, and even a space for dogs to run free. But what excited Eleanor the most was the section dedicated to Buddy and other rescued animals. A small stone monument with a plaque that read, "In honor of Buddy, the dog who united a community." "Let's do something special for the opening, don't you think?" suggested Raphael, a young man who had always loved animals. "How about an adoption ceremony? There are so many pets needing a home." "That would be wonderful," exclaimed Eleanor, her eyes shining. "We can invite the city shelter and help find homes for these little ones." The day of the inauguration arrived, and the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. Neighbors and children gathered in the park, and the sound of laughter and barking filled the air. Eleanor stood on an improvised stage, nervous but excited. She looked at Buddy, who was by her side, and took a deep breath. "Hello, everyone," she started, her voice a bit shaky. Today we are celebrating not just the opening of this park, but what Buddy has brought to our lives. He not only saved me but brought us all together. This park is a symbol of our community, our strength, and our love for animals." A wave of applause followed, and the children began to chant Buddy's name. "Buddy, Buddy!" They ran to him, who wagged his tail, happy for the attention. "Let's take this day to remember that each of us can make a difference in the life of an animal," Eleanor continued, looking into the eyes of everyone present. "Today, we have the chance to help give a new life to many pets who need a loving home." Raphael approached with a small puppy that was trembling with nerves. "Eleanor, this is Max. He was rescued from a shelter and needs a family. What do you think about starting the adoption with him?" "Of course. Who would like to give a home to Max?" Eleanor called out, and the children raised their hands excitedly. A little girl with curly hair named Sophia took a hesitant step forward. "I would love to take care of him," she said, looking at the dog with affection. "Then it seems that Max has found his new best friend," Eleanor replied, smiling. Raphael handed the puppy to Sophia, who immediately began playing with him. A round of applause for Sophia and Max. The applause echoed, and Eleanor felt a wave of warmth in her chest. It was more than just an opening. It was a celebration of life, unity, and love for animals. As the day went on, people began signing up to adopt other animals that were at the shelter. The energy in the park was contagious, and the sense of community was high. Eleanor realized that Buddy, in some way, had brought forth the kindness and desire to help that had always been hidden inside each of them. "I never imagined this would happen," Eleanor said to Maria, who was beside her, smiling. "Buddy really changed everything. He is a true hero, Eleanor." "And you are too," Maria replied, squeezing her friend's hand. "You brought us all together and gave us a new purpose." The sun began to set, and the park lights came on, creating a magical atmosphere. Eleanor looked at Buddy, who was surrounded by children and dogs, happy and content. "What would I do without you, my friend?" she whispered, as the dog looked at her with eyes full of love and understanding. The night was illuminated by twinkling stars, and a festive spirit filled the newly opened park. Eleanor was nervous, but a wave of emotion enveloped her as she prepared to give her speech. By her side, Buddy, with his shiny coat and expressive eyes, observed the movement around him, as if he sensed the importance of the moment. The laughter of the children echoed in the air, and the smiles of the neighbors spread like a comforting warmth. Eleanor took a deep breath and approached the podium. The murmur of the crowd diminished as she began to speak. "Dear friends, family, and everyone gathered here today." Her voice trembled slightly, but Buddy's presence beside her seemed to fill her with courage. "Today we celebrate not only the opening of this park, but the renewal of our lives and bonds. I want to thank each one of you for making this possible." A warm applause erupted among those present, and she smiled, feeling encouraged. "When Buddy came into my life, I was a lonely woman, without hope. He not only saved me but also brought back the joy I had lost." The crowd began to murmur with excitement, and some neighbors waved at Buddy, who wagged his tail, as if he understood the importance of Eleanor's words. "I never imagined that a simple dog could have such a profound impact on my life and the lives of all of us," she continued. "Buddy guided me to rediscover my city, my history, and, most importantly, the connections I had left behind. He reminded me that it's never too late to start over." As she spoke, Eleanor looked at Buddy, who was surrounded by children, one of them petting his head. "He is more than a dog. He is a symbol of love, resilience, and new beginnings. Through him, we found hope in places we thought were lost." The crowd applauded again, and she felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. After the speech, Eleanor stepped down from the podium and walked towards Buddy, who greeted her with contagious enthusiasm. "You did all this, my friend," Eleanor said, petting the dog's head. "Without you, none of this would have happened." A group of children approached, tugging at her hands. "Eleanor, Can we play with Buddy? They were radiant, and the dog seemed instantly energized by the idea. Of course, he loves to play, Eleanor replied, allowing them to take Buddy to the lawn. As the children ran and played with Buddy, Eleanor watched the scene with a broad smile. There, in the park that had been transformed by love and community effort, she saw life blossoming again. Neighbors chatted with each other, sharing stories and laughter. The atmosphere was one of celebration and unity. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eleanor and Buddy moved away from the hustle and bustle a little. They found a bench under a tree, where they could contemplate the illuminated park. "Look, Buddy," Eleanor said, gazing at the vibrant space that now belonged to the community. "This is all thanks to you." Buddy, with his head resting on her legs, seemed to understand every word. "You are the true hero here. You brought us all together," she continued, "and now we have a place to gather, to support each other, and to remember that we can always start over." The glow of the stars began to intensify, and Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the tranquility of the moment. "You know, it's funny how life can change in an instant. You came into my life in a moment of darkness and brought light. Who would have thought a dog could do so much?" Buddy looked at her with his deep, loyal gaze, as if promising he would always be by her side. "You have a special place in my heart, Buddy. No matter what happens, we will always have this connection," Eleanor said, her voice soft and filled with emotion. And so, under the starry sky, Eleanor and Buddy remained together, watching the park that symbolized not only the renewal of their lives, but also the strength of the community that had come together around them. A new chapter had begun, and they knew that together they could face any storm that might arise. Hey there, what did you think of this story? Your opinion is essential for us to improve our content. Write your thoughts in the comments and remember to subscribe and like this video. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video.